Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy, the Real Steel H6S1. First off, I want to thank my buddy Ovan for sending this guy along. It's an interesting little knife, and Real Steel is a brand I hadn't played with much before. So, hey, thank you very much there. Size comparison, here is your Spyderco Delica, as tradition dictates. Right here we got an Ontario Rat number 2, and the Rat number 1. There we go. Anything else here for size? Oh, Shabazz. I got it on the table. Why not? So there we go. Let's go on ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me talk about Real Steel a bit, because like I said, it's a company I've not talked about much. Real Steel is a Chinese company, entirely Chinese-made. Looking they're kind of trying to come in that middle patch between, on the budget Chinese end, like your Ganzo, your Sanren move, that sort of affair, and then on the higher end, like your Kaiser, your Rayot, your Wii, that sort of thing. So they're trying to hit that mid-range, and so they're targeting American markets primarily, but, the mid-range of American markets. And then finally, I do want to point out, this is not a factory edge. This is an actually really excellent edge that my buddy Ovan put on it. So there we go. Let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of your Real Steel H6S1 right here. So on the good side, first off, I'm actually a big fan of the blade on this guy in a variety of ways. It's got a nice grind to it. It's got a relatively full, relatively flattish grind. It's relatively thin behind the edge. Hopefully you can see that there. And, the blade grind actually kind of guides, the plunge grind guides you away from the thumb stud, which means that the thumb stud isn't going to interfere quite as much as it could potentially on other knives. It's still a little bit out there, but okay, whatever. I also want to say that the relatively thin blade, I mean, if you look at the thickness of this blade relative to, say, your Spyderco Delica, it's not a terribly thick blade, but it's also very deep, which makes for a pretty good slicer. This is, functionally speaking, a pretty good tool for, well, cutting things, and that's important. There are some nice details on this guy as well. Primarily the fact that the inside of the liner is milled out to reduce weight, and then you've also got this nice little lanyard tube here. Very often on the low end they just leave holes here, but yeah, they actually went so far as to put in a lanyard tube, which is nice, and they beamed it on this side so it's not rattling around, which is also kind of nice, although a little frustrating. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So it's got that internal milling. It's got some signs that they do give a damn here. The ergonomics on this guy are pretty decent, actually. Bordering on good. This is a little bit of a hot spot, and the clip is absolutely a hot spot in there, but it does feel good in the hand, and you've got good purchase on it. It's relatively secure, and, it feels nice as you're using it for cutting. So that's kind of a beautiful thing. Then, I gotta say, this knife is surprisingly smooth. And I imagine it would be even more so if I was running it on grease rather than an oil. This is a knife that's running on washes, and it's surprisingly good for what you're getting here. I'm not going to say it's, a Shabazz. It's not a Sleesh Bowie, but at the same time, the smoothness on this guy is pretty impressive. And it deploys rather nicely. They've got the detent dialed in as well. So that's really nice. And then finally on the good side, and this could pass for great, but this is a pretty good looking knife overall. The fake carbon fiber here combined with the little tiny bit of recurve combined with this, I don't know, for whatever reason, this knife tickles me in a way that, just looking down at it, I was like, that's an attractive knife. The little shock tooth thing here I could live, but nonetheless, I find this knife attractive with this swedge and everything. That's kind of neat. So, and it's a Liang Gang design, so well done there, Liang. And I'm sure I'm butchering your name. My apologies. But anyway, so that's what we got going on here on the good side. It's surprisingly smooth. It looks pretty classy. It's got decent ergos. It's got a nice deep blade, which makes for good slicing. It's got some nice details, like the internal milling. And, overall, there's a lot to be impressed by here. Let's talk about the great. So on the great side, usually when you're looking at an inexpensive sort of knife, there's nothing particularly new or different or innovative about them. They're just made inexpensively. This guy actually does have a little innovation. I've seen it on one other Real Steel knife, the E571, I believe. But it's this little guy right here. In addition to serving as a lock bar over travel stop, which prevents the lock bar from springing out that direction, it also serves as a lock bar lock. If you slide this guy up, you can no longer fully disengage the lock bar. You can get it to travel a little bit, but it will never get to a point where this knife is opening. So, while this guy is locked in place, the blade really cannot close without some sort of serious structural failure. Either this thing popping off, and so effectively this is doing the same thing as the Lion Steel, I forget what they call it, Roto Lock, is it? But either way, they're doing a very similar thing. They're just doing it a little bit differently than they are, and that's kind of excellent here. So I appreciate the fact that even though they're making something that's pretty inexpensive, they're also doing something that's a little different, a little innovative. How useful that is in your everyday life, especially on a knife that, at least from this side, looks a little bit more classy, gentlemanly, I don't know. But at the same time, it's not... There's no real problem with it. There's nothing wrong with having it there, and if you never use it, it's just a lock bar over travel stop. So that's kind of beautiful. So that's what's great to me about this knife, is that in addition to making it inexpensive, they're also doing something a little different and a little innovative. So can't argue with that. Well, maybe they're not innovative in that I don't think they made that up necessarily, but you know what I mean. It's outside the beaten path. Let's talk about the bad. So on the bad side here, unfortunately, the price on this guy is kind of okay. I'm not saying it's terribly bad. I'm not saying it's ugly, but it's okay. You look at it, $50, and that's fine for what you're getting. But the thing is, I feel a little bit weird paying that much money for a Chinese-made knife that has zero warranty, zero really customer support. I mean, it's probably okay. It's compelling enough, but that's not the kind of value I would expect out of a brand that's really aiming to be a inexpensive Chinese kind of company. They're cranking the prices a little bit too high. I see this guy at $40 rather than 50, but you know, not a huge deal, not a huge value, but it's okay. Next thing, the recurve on this guy is another one of those things I kind of go back and forth about, because the recurves I don't tend to love. I've got the Grimsmo Norseman, which I love, but I put up with the recurve there. On this guy, there's just enough recurve here to kind of mess with sharpening a little bit, but there's not really enough to make a huge difference. That said, the knife does look really good, and so I'm not so bad out of shape about it. But that is something you got to keep in mind if you're using flat stones as some kind of a guided system that doesn't do well with recurves. You're going to be fighting that. Again, that's not a big deal. This guy is also a little bit heavier than you would expect. Looking at it from this side, it looks like a pretty lightweight sort of knife, but because this half of the knife is steel, you're looking at 3.7 ounces. I'm not saying that's heavy. It's just a little heavier than you expect, and it's a dense little knife, which is something, there you go, think about. This is Chinese made entirely, and it's a Chinese company, so all the money you spend on this is staying over there. For some people, that's going to be a big, bad, ugly thing. For me, it doesn't bug me so much, but there you go. The clip on this guy, as I mentioned, is a bit of a hot spot, absolutely, because you've got this clip ramp popping up here. It goes relatively high, relatively quickly. It's a fine pocket clip, but it's a little bit not so ideal in the hand there. Next thing, the steel on this guy is 14C28N, also very similar to your Sandvik sort of steel. It gets a really nice edge. It takes a beautiful razor edge, but it doesn't hold it for all that long. It's sort of in that AUS-8 HCR13 MOV. It's a steel that's fine, I guess. It's probably adequate, but it doesn't bring me any joy either. And again, that kind of comes back to, it's a solid knife, but the value is not blowing me away there. Next thing, the lanyard tube is peened on this side, which means that you cannot take out the lanyard tube from this liner ever. That's just a little bit frustrating during disassembly. Not the end of the world, but something to keep in mind. The thumb stud on this guy, I really do not care for. If we look closely at it here, we can see that it's kind of a ziggurat sort of conventional shape, but then it goes hollow on the inside. And what that means is that most of the time, as you're using this guy, your finger is pushing directly into this little edge right here. And that's just not ideal. And I find a slightly more domed thumb stud like this guy on your Ontario Rat number 1, or even the pyramidal thumb stud on the Shabazz, which I don't love. I find that a little bit more comfortable than this guy, where you're really just pressing against that rim. It doesn't bring me any joy whatsoever on the thumb stud. Then finally, perhaps the worst thing in the bad category here is the fake carbon fiber. Now look, there may be 0.5 millimeter of carbon fiber here. I'm not 100%, but it does look an awful lot like a decal, and at the very least, I'm pretty sure that this is G10 in the middle here. Because you can see, kind of like the Spyderco peel ply carbon fiber, that there's one finish here, and then there's a bulk of something in the middle, and then there's another thing on the bottom side there. Maybe this is just a really low quality or weird carbon fiber, but this looks a lot like G10 with a sticker on it. And whatever it is, I don't love it, because the show side of this knife is very slippery, unlike a knife that's got an actual textured carbon fiber to it, like the ZT452 here. This is very vinyl stickery. And so it's not great. And personally, I would much rather have real G10 with some degree of gripitude to it than this fake carbon fiber sort of affair. So that's, to me, bad. It could even be ugly. But again, on the knife, relatively inexpensive, it's okay. So that's your bad here. We've got the fake carbon fiber, or at least the really low quality carbon fiber. Don't love the thumb stud. Don't love the peen lanyard tube here. The steel on this guy is fine, I guess. The clip is a hot spot. It's Chinese made, which is a problem for some people. It's a little heavier than you might expect, given that half of it's steel. I don't necessarily love the recurve, but I'm okay with it. And the price is okay. So there you go. Let's talk about the ugly for this. So on the ugly side, first off, if you go to the warranty page on Real Steel's website, you'll realize very quickly that there is not a warranty page at all. There is no mention of a warranty on their website. There's not even a mention of a way to get parts. So basically, you are buying this knife as a one-off sort of thing, and you're going to use it until it dies, at which point Real Steel just doesn't give any sort of anything approximating a damn. And that's honestly a little bit ugly. That's fine in a $10 San Renmo, and, I understand why it doesn't make sense for them to do that financially. But if you look at it, $50 now, you're starting to get into a territory where you gotta be doing a little bit better than that. And so I feel like they're really cheaping out there. And if this were an oh my god value, I'd be much more okay with that. Again, on a $10 San Renmo, who needs a freaking warranty? It's $10. But on this guy, you're starting to get into places and prices where that's just no longer acceptable. So Real Steel, up your game there. Second thing is that this little guy is another Real Steel knife, actually sent to me by my same viewer, Ovan, and this was an absolute train wreck in terms of tolerances and whatnot. It was really, really hard to get back together. This guy worked out okay, but when one knife from one company is really terrible and another knife from the same company is okay, that points towards inconsistency. So I don't feel okay just saying, this one's fine, so all of them are going to be when... then this knife was the same price, so it's not like this is a cheapo model, this is a better one. So I'm really a little bit concerned, and especially given that there's no warranty, you might want to buy this from a place that offers you some sort of a return policy for defective knives, and you want to give it a check out, make sure there's no side-to-side play, that kind of thing, before you sort of start cutting up bricks with it. Don't cut up bricks with it. Sandvik's not going to do well for that. So anyways, that's the ugly, is that there is zero warranty and support, and that there's a pretty good chance of inconsistency given Real Steel's, some of their other entries. So let's go final conclusions. So I'm actually having a little bit of trouble coming to conclusions about this knife and my final recommendation. Because, at some level, there's a lot to like here. It's an attractive knife. It's relatively solid, and especially with this little lock bar locker thing, it's even more so. It's safe. This is not a knife that I'm particularly worried about breaking or destroying my hands when it does, unlike some other inexpensive sorts of Chinese knives here. Sorry, Z Hunter. But, and it's actually got a surprisingly good action and some nice features to it. So at that level, it's a very, very nice knife, and it's a good functional tool. I don't have any problem recommending this as a pure cutting tool. However, at the same time, the steel on this guy is just... it's probably fine. And the company, more so, is a little bit concerning. You get zero support off of this. And so I just don't know. I feel like if you're loving the look of this knife and you're willing to pay a price that's a little higher than I think it deserves, then this is not a bad choice whatsoever. You're probably going to be happy with this, especially if you buy it from someplace where you can return it if they've got a quality control issue there. But at the same time, in the $50 region, there are a lot of really good options there. You've got things like your Rat 1 and a D2 steel, which has a better steel and construction that's probably about on par. Maybe the Rat 1, it's a little more solid, although there's a lot to be said for this construction over here, too. So that's running about $40, and for $60, you're in a Spyderco Delica, which is one of the very best everyday carry knives ever, in my personal opinion. But, this is another fine option. It's not a value winner necessarily, but it is a pretty nice knife. And honestly, I think it's worth considering. So I guess that's where I land. If you love the look of it, check it out. But, I'm not going to go too much stronger in my push than that. So, there you go. Hope this was interesting. Damn it, I forgot to make this knife is not a real steel sort of joke in there. Because the value is... Okay, I'm done. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.